Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reasonably Fine Art Talk. We're down here in Austin, Texas, at the great Betty Soo's house. This is her little home recording studio where she does audio books and does little home recordings and does the Nobody's Happy Hour, which is every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. At 6:30 p.m. Central Time, she has a special guest each week where they do it. She's got the wheel of misfortune. You spin it, and it comes up with things like audience request cover, and then you request a song that they don't know. And it's so much fun. So much fun. So if you're free tonight at 6:30 p.m. Central Time, that is 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, her guest tonight is Colin Gilmore. Colin Gilmore, you may know, is a terrific Austin singer-songwriter who probably best known for writing The Way We Are, which is the title song from the last Flatlanders record, and Jimmy Dale Gilmore of the Flatlanders. So the Flatlanders is Jimmy Dale Gilmore, Butch Hancock, and Joe Ely, and Jimmy Dale is Colin's dad. So a little nepotism at work there. But anyway, if you're free tonight, oh, look, Betty Soo's arm. Betty Soo's arm appears next to a guitar. That's Betty Soo's arm. It's a fine arm. It's a fine arm, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, welcome. Yes. Welcome to the Reasonably Fine Art Talk. And I thought what I'd do is talk a little about what I've been doing this week. Because this week, obviously, I'm away from my studio. And rather than trying to do small pieces in the kitchen in my usual style, I thought I'd take the opportunity to work on mediums that I'm not as comfortable with. So I busted out the watercolor and the gouache, and I thought we'd take a little tour of what I did this week. How are we doing, Betty Soo? Ready to go? Let's go to the first one. This is my setup. I've got a little tabaret, because life is a tabaret, old chum. Got a little tabaret right next to the sliding door to the patio. So I've got good. That's north light, isn't it, Betty Soo? Yeah. So got good north light, so it doesn't change throughout the day. And I had, if you look up at the top of this photograph, there is a printout of a photo that I took in Wyoming. And I'm just using that as basically my reference. It's a simple landscape. We'll have a close-up of it in a minute. And then here are just the various iterations where I'm experimenting with things. The tubes of paint in the center are Royal Talon's gouache, which is an opaque watercolor. And then the black unit over kind of center left is a Royal Talon's Rembrandt watercolor, portable watercolor dry pan set. Next slide, please, Betty Soo. So this was the source photo. I love doing the Buffalo Bill Art Show and Sale in Cody, Wyoming every September. And last year I flew into, can we go back, Betty Soo, to the photo? Last year I flew to, what's the biggest city in Montana? Missoula, and then drove down to Cody and went past this scene and just I snapped a whole bunch of photos. Now, the one thing, I didn't go to Cody this year due to COVID. No Cody because of COVID. I also didn't go to On Plein Air Texas that's going on right now, which is very sad. I love On Plein Air Texas. That's out in San Angelo. But the idea of manning a booth for 2 days, trying to sell paintings to people who might or might not be wearing masks did not really strike gosh, I got to get me some of that chord. So I passed on doing EPAT this year, but I want to do a shout out to everybody who's out there right now and urge everyone to visit Plein Air Texas website to see the paintings as they are going up and support that great organization if you can. Anyway, so I took this photo And I just used it as kind of my armature for these experimentations because it's a bunch of really simple forms. The lighting, there is directional lighting. There's lighting coming in kind of from the upper right, illuminating the plains of the land. And there's gentle light on some of the structures, but it's not overwhelming. It's basically anodyne enough that I can take it any particular direction I want to. It's not complicated perspective. It's got a nice range of kind of dynamic values, and it's got some utility poles. So I love having utility poles in a reference, because then I can just use them as a way of stitching the land and the sky together. Next slide, please, BettySoo. So this was the first one I did. This is, a little, what is it, 4x5 or 4x6 watercolor pad, or 3.5x5, taped off, just a messing around with watercolors. I am no watercolor savant, I'll tell you that. And just getting my hand into experimenting with it. Now, watercolor is transparent, so you can get nice kind of sky textures, but to me, the darks always appear kind of grainy, kind of mealy, kind of washed out. So this is not very exciting little experiment. Next one, BettySoo. So this was the first of the. This one I did with acrylic washes. I got some acrylic ink. I got transparent oxide red. I got a yellow ochre, and I got an ultramarine blue, and just did very, very thin washes. The thing I like, immediately upon working with watercolor, I became frustrated because the watercolor lifts. If you re-wet it, it lifts. So that made me immediately appreciate again acrylic, because when you put acrylic down, it dries. And so in my infinite wisdom, I was thinking, I'm going to do my underpaintings in acrylic, and then I'll do gouache, opaque watercolor, on top of that acrylic. And that'll be the best of all possible worlds. I was getting very, very excited about this, ladies and gentlemen, very excited, and started watching James Gurney tutorials on YouTube. There's a ton of really bad art on YouTube, but there's also a ton of really, really useful stuff that's out there right now. I hope if you haven't watched any of James Gurney's free samples on YouTube, totally recommend that. That guy is a monster. But the thing that's sort of daunting about his tutorials he's like, and you can see that the light is coming from behind those buildings. And meanwhile, he is painting in incredibly detailed, perfectly valued structures. And he's not explaining what's going on in his brain. He's just talking about that the light is coming from behind those buildings. So it's a little bit like watching alchemy while getting a tutorial on making a breakfast taco. So it's great, though. Definitely love James Gurney. Anyway, so this was my first. This was just acrylic ink washes, just using a broad flat. I'm not going for great detail, and I'm also trying not to do what I know how to do. I am trying to push it. Now, Erin says, damn, sometimes I think I'm picking up a brush when I see your work and I just shake my head and cook instead. Yeah, but all any of us are doing is we're at our level of competence, and then we try to move beyond it. So I've got I look at this and I see a totally uninspiring, uninteresting, I could do that in my sleep. That's just because I've done this 33,000 times. You can make a popover, Erin. I cannot make a popover. And I look at your popovers and I shake my head and say, damn, never mind. And I go and paint an uninspired barn. Next slide, BettySoo. So this was on the same sheet. This is on acrylic primed linen pad. I think it's an 11 by 14. So these are all about 5 by 9. And so I'm doing 2 up on a pad. This is, again, acrylic washes underneath and then a bunch of gouache on top. Just trying to learn how they interact, how they intermarry. Not trying to do a slavish reproduction of that photograph, but trying to put stuff down and then honestly react to it to create a piece that is true to itself. I am Larry Moore. You guys probably know the great gouache artist. Well, he's a great artist, but he does a lot of stuff in gouache. Larry Moore. He describes gouache as like taking a pet bear out for a walk. It's like, okay, we're going to go this. Oh, I guess we're going to go this way. Gouache is going to do what it wants to do, especially if you don't really know what you're doing. Because gouache, the lights dry darker and the darks dry lighter, which is why you will sometimes see this kind of unifying flattening that goes on with gouache. So the sky here, you'll see that greenish, kind of greenish, bluish, yellow sky in the upper right. That is the acrylic washes, pretty much as they were. And then the area that's worked with gouache are the really brushy parts in basically the center of the painting. Next slide. Yeah, Susan, Gurney's book, Color and Light, is a wonderful reference tool. That is a terrific, terrific book. So this was an acrylic wash underpainting with gouache and watercolor. I think I got frustrated with the amount of white that I dumped onto that previous image. And so I wanted something that had more kind of color integrity. So this one, I took the ultramarine blue acrylic ink with a jot, the merest jot of the transparent red oxide, and it makes a little bit more kind of a Prussian blue. Put that down. I'm trying to remember exactly what I did, but that I believe is the sky color. Then I did some watercolor washes on top of that. And I'm very happy with that sky. I really like that sky. And I like the kind of the luminosity behind the barn on the left. But then I darkened in the barn probably a little bit more than I would want to, than ideally if I was thinking about a finished painting. But what is happening here is I don't view any of these paintings as finished work. I'm not aiming for them to be finished work. They're never going to be in galleries, but I'm learning stuff. And if I keep at this, each painting I learn something more. And here, yeah, there's some gouache. There's gouache on top of watercolor, on top of acrylic washes, but it's less harsh than that previous one. Back up again, BettySoo. This one, the gouache marks are extremely, you can see them, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's kind of reminiscent of Lydecker, if Lydecker was a three-toed sloth, back to the one we were on. But this one, I'm not using that kind of really brushy effect, except maybe in the lower left foreground. But I am learning more about how to integrate the gouache, watercolor and acrylic in the skies. I like the way the land moves far back in the right. This one, at least on the screen, is not disturbing me too much at the moment. Next one. This was on an 8x10 cotton panel. Did acrylic wash underpainting. and then gouache and watercolor. This is the first pass where you can see the stained color that I had done with the acrylic washes. That is the lightest area in the ground. And then before I let that fully dry, so it's kind of that light yellow ochre, let that fully dry. Then I put some more acrylic washes down, which I started wiping off before they were fully dry. No particular reason, it's just what I was experimenting with. If you look over on the lower left, that kind of reddish, kind of the bloody color, that was transparent oxide red, just kind of puddled, transparent oxide red acrylic, puddled, and then kind of hit a little bit with paper towel. And then I started brushing in gouache, that's the opaque white, in the sky. Susan asked, how does the watercolor behave on top of acrylic primed linen? Fine. I thought perhaps it would resist, you know. It did not do that at all. It did not, you know, kind of you put it down and then a circle of dry under the substrate appearing. That happened if I made it really, really, really wet. But if you're working with something kind of consistency of a little bit thicker than water, it's not, it really worked just fine. Anyway, so this is an intermediate stage of this 8x10. Next one. This is a later stage of it. Go back again. So this is where it was, then go forward. And that's where it is at present. I brushed in a bunch more gouache in the foreground. And then you can see that I softened the edges of that gouache in the sky. Go back again one more time. And then forward. So the passage between the two barns, that was the area that I was really spending time on this one. I softened it a little, and you can see with the utility pole, it's a little bit too bright relative on the left, relative to the right side of the utility pole, but it works okay. It's funny, if you look at the outbuilding on the right of the central barn, that was just a couple of brush strokes. And it went down very without much problem at all. And then I put the sky hole up through the window with just a little bit of opaque gouache. But I like here how there are the hard edges, and then it gets kind of softer over toward the hard edges of the central barn shape. And then as you move toward the left, that next building that maybe that stands alone, I'm softening that. So there's this conversation in hard edges between the central barns and then that next barn, and then it softens and kind of becomes more with the landscape. And then the building on the far left, I'm not very happy with, but I wasn't really spending a lot of time thinking about that. One thing I do want to point out to people, when you are doing buildings, very often people will put the foundation of the building as a very visible line between the structure and the ground. I find it works much better to kind of feather it, as I have here with the barns, into the grass. I think it causes the structures to sit in the landscape much more believably than sitting on the landscape. Anyway, so these were the experiments that I did day before yesterday. Yesterday, BettySoo and I went out for a little tour of the hill country, and that was lovely. And now I'm going to go out and drive out to Johnson City, Texas. Drive out to Johnson City, Texas, and look for vernacular architecture for a few hours. Well, BettySoo prepares for her Nobody's Happy Hour. I hope you will join us for Nobody's Happy Hour. I will post a link to it on my Facebook page, on my Charlie Hunter Studio Facebook page, and maybe we'll see you then. But anyway, what I want everybody to do when you're experimenting is try to lift that critical voice out of your brain, because it totally was going on for me the whole time. Run through the slides again very quickly, BettySoo. Let's just go through them all. I mean, I start doing this and I'm like, I've got all this preconceived after watching all these Gurney things. I know how I want to interpret this scene in front of me. Then I take the pet bear out for a walk. Just go right through them. I take the pet bear out for a walk, and it does what it wants to do, and it just keeps telling me what I need to learn or what I can learn from all this experimentation. And I want, rather than trying to say, I am going to try to get these materials to do what I want them to do, what I'm trying to do is say, I am going to let these materials teach me and inform my process going on. And if you can, the more we can do that, the more I think we, in the long term, are fulfilled. So thanks so much for joining us, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks so much. Take good care, and we'll see you next Tuesday for another Reasonably Fine Art Talk. Bye-bye.